Hello, freak bitches.
And it's not so easy to sort out who's the good ones and who's the bad ones.
Sort of like what you were talking about, these people that have the simplistic idea that all you have to do is get Donald Trump high on DMT and he's going to see the light.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the case.
Not necessarily the case.
Yeah,
I think it would be wasted on him. I think we would have to do at least an indwelling catheter, maybe 2 or 3 hours of continuous DMT
A catheter?
infusion.
Why Why
sorry,
a catheter?
wrong term.
Why intravenous? But it's very, very Freudian. He decided to go through his dick.
Right.
That is hilarious.
Not that. We'll go through the vein.
I don't know, man. I think you might have nailed it the first time. That might be the way to get it. Maybe the way to get it to him is some perfect Russian robot fuck doll who just locks him up and, right when he gets inside of her.
There you go.
She gets him in full guard, locks him in place, and catheter-like delivery. Wow. Yeah, maybe they can program it like DMT, like little nanobots that go right through the penis hole, right into the system. They just run out of her. Right in there, and he just takes off.
But again, there has to be something there.
Somebody animate
for it
that
to have an effect.
Please, somebody animate that. I know there's somebody out there that wants to. That's do it. It's the way to do it. Just some perfect, super hot 10 Russian hooker-looking chick. No offense to Russian hookers.
Right. Yeah. Or Donald Trump.
Or Donald Trump, even. Look, Donald Trump was a baby at one point in time. And you and I would both have children. We know it's a delicate process of turning an adult, making an adult out of a child. And a lot of factors come into play. But almost all babies are born, well, they certainly have their own personality. They're in many ways a blank slate. Mm-hmm. And so they're in a lot of ways a victim of the environment that they're raised in. And that's one of the weird things that I've developed in my own self over the last few years is just thinking about people as babies. I think of everyone as a baby now. Like since I've had kids, obviously I think of them as being adults, but I think of them as an adult that used to be a baby. And I never used to do that. Before I had children, I used to think of people as being in a static state. I meet you and I go, well, this is Dennis McKenna. This is how Dennis McKenna's always been. And now I go, oh, Dennis used to be a little boy. Dennis was a baby. He used to, and then he saw a lot of things and he learned a lot of things. But you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's
I know.
Trump. He's almost as much of a victim as he is a perpetrator.
In a way, he is. And
yeah.
Trump's a good example of somebody. I mean, in some ways, he's still a child.
Yeah.
He never really grew up. I mean, that's part of the problem. And everyone, because he has so much power and money, everyone kowtows to his impulses. But in some ways, like Jared and Ivanka are maybe a stabilizing influence on him, although
maybe.
I'm sure their agenda is totally evil as well. So
well, confused. They definitely don't deserve the amount of power that they're wielding, nor does anybody. What's more fascinating about him than anything is that what he holds up to the golden standard is success, right? I mean, this is the guy that, everything has to have his name on it. It's all Trump this and Trump that. And if you looked at like the great American vision of success, it's to become some sort of super rich ultra billionaire. But even though everybody knows he's a super rich ultra billionaire, he still is deceptive about his own success. He still has to lie about it. He still has to distort it far past, whether it's the numbers that came to the inauguration, whether it's the numbers that he won the Electoral College by. He lies about all these different things, and it's inherent. It's a part of him, this intense lack of satisfaction with any result. Any result, even if it's winning by a mile, he must win by 100 miles.
Right.
Right. And that's childish. That's like an intense, but it's that same intense dissatisfaction that's inherently very dangerous in a leader, because it's leading him to make these critical judgments that aren't based entirely on reality, but rather what he wants people to perceive.
Right. That's quite right. I think that's dangerous. That's what we were saying before. No thoughtfulness. There's no thoughtfulness in the man. There's no reflection.
Right. Reflection and lack of humility.
So this is not what you want in your leaders, because we see what's happening. Like he's going back and forth with the Soviets. He's going back and forth with North Korea, and it's like a schoolyard spat, But these people have nuclear weapons to throw, so we need to back off from that, Donald. It's just, but he can't do that because he has to respond. He has this impulse to respond. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, he's not going to be exposed to ayahuasca, I'm pretty sure. Unfortunately, because it would help him. And, what is disturbing to me in many things about Donald and this sort of reality distortion he's created is people, they take it seriously. I mean, they're sort of like intimidated by it. Not enough people are standing up and saying, well, this is not true. This is not true. You're completely deluded about this. You're, I mean, there's some sort of impulse to show some respect when no respect is due. I mean,
respect for the office, or respect for the
for
position.
the office, for whatever. But then when he comes out with these things that are obviously not true, I'm sorry, there are no alternative facts.
Right.
Alternative facts are lies.
Yeah,
there's only
such
facts.
A bizarre candy coating of bullshit. Yeah. Alternative facts is the most hilarious candy coating of bullshit ever. My hope is that we get through this without nuclear war, and then we realize that we can't have a fucking president. And the idea of having one alpha chimp run the entire group of 300 plus million people is insane. And it doesn't work when you have technology, when you have this ability to communicate instantaneously, globally, with everybody, constantly. It's an archaic idea that served its time, but needs to be revamped.
How would you do that?
That's a really good question. I'm not the guy to be the architect of the future civilization, but I would think that putting as much power as we put into one individual is insanely problematic. It's just you're dealing with all these ego issues, decision-making issues.
Right.
And also the camps, the two separate camps, the right-left camp. That's crazy, too.
That's crazy, too. Right. No, I mean, I think one way to approach it wouldn't have to be such a tremendous shift from what we've got. It would be to go to a parliamentary system like Canada has, for example, where you represent your party, and if the other party gets enough, they can vote you out without going through the whole impeachment process. There is no impeachment process. The parties can form a coalition and vote the prime minister out, and it's much easier to topple a government, and in some ways that's a good thing. It's more resilient. And Canada's a good, there are many parliamentary democracies, but that's the one that's closest to
I think
us,
there's also an issue with dealing with the real problems of the world in a time where the realities of, say, Syria and what's going on over there are so horrific, and they're so far removed from the realities that we deal with here. You almost need to have someone who has some sort of experience with those people in those lands to understand and put it into perspective.
Yeah.
And I think we're entirely lacking of that perspective, like in terms of our culture. Like, I don't think we understand what a brutal military dictatorship is like. I think we see it on television, and it seems almost too abstract. But the president has to deal with that in a very real way.
And no one person can, but that's what advisors are for.
Right, exactly.
Right? But if you don't have good advisors, or if you choose to ignore them, then you're in deep shit.
Right.
Or and that's, I mean, Donald appoints advisors who already share his delusions.
Of course.
So there's nobody there to say, wait a minute, you're wrong. And based on experience and expertise and all this, you're wrong, and you need to rethink it. That's what bothers me about, one among many things, about the way that he proceeds. I mean, the thing that bothers me most about the change in administrations is that they have basically looked at climate change. They said, we don't believe it. It's not happening. It's not even on the table. And actually, that needs to be the thing on the table. That should be the primary thing we're talking about. All this other stuff is important, but we're talking about the accelerating changes that are essentially undermining the mechanisms that keep the Earth habitable by life. This is a pretty important issue. And to have people that say, well, it isn't, we don't believe in climate change. Well, I'm sorry, climate change is real. I don't care what the fuck you believe. It is real. And for this administration to not only ignore it, but then roll back all these other measures that were put into place is, it's just the stupidest idea I can imagine.
Not just roll back, but removing the funding for monitoring it.
Yeah, removing
which
the
is really
funding,
scary.
suppressing the information and all this. So, if you look at the people in the Trump administration, they're either from the energy industry, Rex Tillerson, I think the government has become essentially a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, and not the other way around. And so, that's what they're doing. And
that's terrifying.
It's Goldman Sachs or ExxonMobil. I mean, corporations run the world. We've known this for a long time. Governments are just puppets.
Does this, in some ways, it's just too eerily parallel to what we're talking about with the rainforest, like with all this potential in the rainforest, and almost this race. The race to see, like, can we get to these incredible new plants that we haven't discovered before we fuck it up by cutting down all the hardwoods and burning all the forests? Can we get to this potential future, utopia, of people being able to read each other's minds, being able to communicate simultaneously all throughout the world, understanding each other regardless of language? Can we get to that before we blow ourselves up, before we get into a nuclear war with fucking North Korea or any of this crazy shit with this insane administration that's existing in this sort of chaotic manner alongside some of the brightest minds and most innovative people that have ever walked the face of the planet, that are influencing things in a way today that it's really unparalleled in terms of human history. The potential that any new invention or innovation can enact, whether it's understanding new compounds that we discovered in the rainforest or some new technology that's made in Silicon Valley. I mean, this is an amazing, amazing parallel.
Yeah, no, I agree. It does seem like a race in some ways between idiocy and genius.
Yeah.
They're incredibly brilliant people, and they're developing, and I mean, there are solutions to the problems that face us, right? But then on the other side, you have the know-nothings, who are marching into the future, eyes firmly fixed on the rearview mirror. It's like, oh yeah, coal technology, that's the greatest thing. Let's go back to that. I mean, is that stupid or what? Coal technology is obsolete.
It's definitely
Why
stupid.
Even, there are better solutions, or the whole attitude toward drugs. Oh, the war on drugs was great. Let's go back to that. I mean, these are people who are not living in the present, for one thing, not planning for the future, and they don't really want to know. It's like our minds are made up. We know drug abuse has got to be bad, so let's prohibit it. Let's go back to the old model. They're not capable of entertaining new ideas, and that's a problem.
What do you think about the idea? And I've heard this brought up, and I've entertained it my own self, that maybe we need some sort of enemy or some sort of thing to resist in order to rise to the full potential of innovation, of ideas, that we almost need some sort of mountain to conquer. We need some sort of a force to be aware of that really makes people rise up. Like I've seen more people politically active and politically engaged now post-election than I ever did before the election, because they didn't expect Trump to win.
Right.
And now that he did, it's like it's raised up this resistance to this insane level that I've never experienced before in my life. I mean, it feels to me like Kent State all over again. It feels
it was a real shock that he won, and I agree, it's been a wake-up call. So now there is this strong resistance movement, and that's a good thing that's happening. Also, journalism has suddenly found itself again. Some journalists, some sectors of it are beginning to, for so long they were essentially stenographers. They would repeat whatever the mouthpieces of the government. Now the journalists are questioning everything and asking, tough questions of these clowns and expecting answers.
Right.
And it's kind of like, when I was young, I wanted to be a journalist, right? I thought Walter Cronkite was the cat's pajamas. I wanted to be like him. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, I just admire journalism, and for a long time I have not found anything to admire in it. It's like they've all been lobotomized or something.
Yeah.
But they're rediscovering it. The good ones are rediscovering it, and the re-emergence of investigative journalism. And right now, I think that's that's our best hope, because I think that these guys, they'll just keep digging. There's going to be so much bad stuff come up about Trump and all this collusion with the Russians, and potentially enough to impeach him. The question is, will the Republicans find enough spine to to do that? But they did with Nixon.
Yeah.
And Nixon, what he did was not nearly as bad as what Trump is doing, and so we'll see where it goes. But
Trump's shameless in a way that Nixon never was.
Shameless, and I take a certain comfort in the thought that they have all these draconian things they want to do, roll back all the environmental regulations, whole immigration thing, war on drugs, but none of it is going to happen. None of it actually will happen.
Well, the immigration stuff's pretty real here in California. ICE is showing up at Home Depots. They showed up at Home Depots. I have a friend who's born in America. He's Mexican. And they asked him where he was born. They told him he's a veteran, and he knew how to deal with this, and he knew what's legal and what's not. And he's a grown man. He's in his 50s. And a
citizen,
and
right?
A citizen, yeah, and a veteran.
Yeah.
He served the country in Iraq, and so they're coming up to him and ask him, where are you born? And he's like, you can't ask me that. He was like, you're not allowed to ask me where I'm born.
Right.
And then, he says, who are you? And we're immigration and whatever the ICE stands for. And he goes, let me see some documentation. The guy shows him his badge and his gun. He goes, that's not your fucking documentation. Pull out your goddamn documentation. And he pulls out his military ID. He's like, look, here's my documentation. This is me. Who the fuck are you? Mm-hmm. And why are you asking people where they're born? I was born in California, okay? You're not allowed to just go up to people and ask them where they're born. But people that don't know that, they're getting arrested, they're getting taken, they're getting deported. They're taking people that are dropping off their children at school. They're grabbing people. And there's a bunch of cases of this. And you're just hearing about the cases that get to the press.
Right.
There's so many of them that you're never going to hear about. And this is just rampant. And this never existed before. Not in the Bush administration. Not in Bush Senior. It just didn't happen before in any conservative administration. They didn't treat it like this. This is a weird time.
Yeah, it is a very weird time, but I think it's temporary.
I hope so. But what you said about journalism, I think it's important to point out that they're just as they fucked up just as hard with the left as they did with the right. They let the Clintons get away with a lot of horse shit. They let Obama get away with a lot of horse shit. They said talking points. They were given talking points, and they ran with those talking points so that they would get access to the president, and they would get access to congressmen, the senators, and they did it forever. And it wasn't journalism, and you're right. And the reason why this guy got into place that's in this situation right now, it's just as much of a fault of them of not holding the left to the fire as it is to what's going on right now.
Yeah, journalism has a lot to answer for. There's no doubt about it. I just have a maybe it's a delusion. I would like to think that journalism is finding its voice and finding its function again. Its function is to, as somebody said, I think it was I.F. Stone, the function is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, right? And that's essentially the journalistic mandate.
Or express the truth and inform.
Seek the truth.
Seek the truth, inform.
And don't assume, play the propaganda game, be able to look beyond it.
And they have to be in this environment where people keep calling fake news. They have to be undeniable. And I think in that sense, they are reinvigorated. You know? That's one of the things that you're seeing that's one of the things that the Times talked about. Like after it was over, after the election was over, they're like, we're going to reinvigorate, refocus our dedication on journalism.
Yeah, and I think that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Then the other side of it is that we can just, the way the Trump administration proceeds with all these things they want to do, they inevitably just get bogged down in litigation, protest. At some point they do have to answer to Congress. So I think, the wheels were already coming off before he even took the oath of office.
Yeah.
They've continued to come off, and it's just going to degenerate into litigation, acrimony, inability to get anything passed, which is all good. I mean, essentially, in this case, chaos is our friend because they won't be able to advance this draconian agenda, thank God. And, hopefully circumstances will enable us to get rid of them quickly.